Well, it's been a very long time since I've done an update on the Wu flu, and that's frankly because, I tend to try and cover things that I don't feel like other people, more mainstream people or even other, alt people on YouTube are talking about so that they, get a little bit of attention. Not that I have a very big platform or anything. But once the Wu flu thing took off and we had, lockdowns in America, it was a pretty mainstream issue, and so there wasn't a huge reason for me to keep talking about it. However, I am seeing now a lot of talk about this idea that there might be a second wave finally coming in, and we're hearing these reports out of China and South Korea of new spikes in cases and new clusters in areas where had previously thought they'd turned the corner. And so could this be the second wave of infections that everybody's worried about? And my impression so far, considering, that these are small clusters from what we're hearing, in Seoul, South Korea, it was 120 people or so, which is sizable. But when you test as much as South Korea does, you're going to find a much higher rate of infection. And I think the biggest takeaway that I've gathered in the months that I've been following this in the media is that at the very beginning, when we were first hearing about these cases of asymptomatic spread and all that, we didn't and the fact that some people could just a lot of people could have the virus and not know it for the whole time that it's in their system. That this virus, only seems to affect certain people, and even, within that group, there's subgroups who are affected to, various degrees. I think that the number of cases tended to be a misleading number because we really didn't know how many there were. Because, if you're going to test someone who's asymptomatic, it's just sort of random chance if you happen to catch them. Otherwise, there could have been plenty of other people who are asymptomatic and, again, never get tested, and you never know about it, which, I hate to give China any credit, but it kind of makes sense given that China doesn't count asymptomatic cases in their total. They're only counting symptomatic people who have tested positive. Now, of course, their number is still BS, even given that. I'm sure they have way more than 84,000 people and more than, however many, single-digit thousands of deaths that they're counting. But there is merit in the idea that you can't really know how many of these asymptomatic folks there are, and so counting them is a part of the, if you have a number that includes them, the number doesn't really mean anything. Right now, we supposedly have 4.2 million people infected in the world, confirmed cases. Well, how many more could that be? It could be millions and millions more. See, at the beginning, we didn't know what the percentage of people who got this that were asymptomatic, and we still don't know that. However, the more testing is done, the more and more it's revealed that people have this and are asymptomatic. And so the fact that there was this cluster in Seoul, South Korea of 120 new confirmed cases, to me, doesn't necessarily mean that there's new spread of the virus. That these people likely were just carrying it all along, and now they were tested for some reason all at once, and so now it's revealed, they had it. And so now when you bring this back to getting back to the lockdowns, the whole rationale behind the lockdowns was not to stop this virus from infecting people, because it was understood that it was going to infect people. However, the idea was, because we didn't know how many people were going to be symptomatic as far as the percentage of folks who were infected, there was this idea that, since we knew that the virus was very contagious, that's one thing we did know, that it was very easy for someone who was infected to spread it to someone else. And so if, say, 80% of the people who were infected were symptomatic, that would give you a lot of people, many, many millions, who would need to be hospitalized. And so it was very important to because within the symptomatic people, there's going to be most of them probably don't need to be hospitalized anyway. And then there's a subset of that 80%, let's say, that needs to be hospitalized. And so the point of the lockdowns was to make sure that we had enough hospital beds. And lots of places were building these auxiliary hospitals. They looked like, field hospitals for a wartime. and none of them have been used. We have our hospitals, sitting empty because they canceled all elective surgeries and tried to empty out the hospitals of people so that there would be room to put these folks in there, because that's what we were seeing in places like Italy and China, was that folks were dying on the floor because there were just so many people that they had to triage patients. And we haven't gotten nearly anywhere near that point here in the U.S. And the reason for that, it would seem, is because so many more people are asymptomatic, as a percentage of the total, than we had originally imagined. That, to me, seems to be the only viable explanation of what we're seeing and why things are not that bad, which is a very good thing. How then do I explain the fact that we saw those videos of hospitals in Wuhan of people, dead bodies just being loaded onto trucks, and people just lying dead in the hallways of these hospitals, and all the sick patients who didn't even have beds just sitting in a chair with an IV? Well, in China, particularly a city like Wuhan, it's very densely populated. People are right on top of each other. They have these massive skyscrapers that, go up, higher than the eye can see. And so in that kind of environment, this thing's going to spread much more rapidly than in a highly suburban or rural country like the United States. Of course, places like New York City are the exception to that, because that's a very densely populated urban center. But for the most part, this is not going to spread rapidly enough throughout the community to overwhelm most hospital systems. At least that's the way that it looks to me. We certainly, in most of the United States, have room to expand. There's room for more cases to be treated. In fact, there are even reports, I don't know if we'll be able to find them, but you can find them around. I've been seeing them in lots of different outlets, that many places now are reporting, and I think New York started this trend, that there's evidence that the virus was already spreading throughout the community in 2019 in places outside of China, even as far back as November or October. And so these lockdowns may have even been, a bit late. Who knows when this virus may have peaked and completely, spread, and permeated our society. Because the only cases that we're going to see are the folks who, essentially need hospitalization. Other than that, you wouldn't notice this virus going around. So the next steps here, I think, needs to be a very detailed analysis of just who is susceptible to this virus and why, if there's any logic to it. What does this virus target? I'm not getting into the whole bioweapon or manufactured virus idea. That's a different video, and I don't have time to get into that issue. So I'm not saying, what was this virus designed to target. I mean, just in a positive sense. What is it doing? Who is it going after? We know that there's all these pre-existing conditions raise a risk, but why is that exactly? Is it just because people who have these conditions tend to be unhealthy anyway, and weak, and so they are more, they die easier? Or are there specific conditions that this virus interacts with? And if we can determine what the exact, risks are in terms of percentage, what your chance of getting seriously ill from this is, well, then that would be a formula for opening things back up to where, you would have a checklist for people of, hey, do any of these, debilitating factors describe you? Basically give people a way of knowing whether they personally are at great risk for this, or if anyone that they're around, their loved ones, their parents, or their, children, because we're hearing a little bit about how this virus might be, causing a rare illness in children, but I haven't seen too much to support that yet. But no matter what, we figured that out, who exactly is at risk there. And it might turn out that it's a lot less people than we originally thought. So all of the news that we've been getting about this virus in recent weeks, to me, seems like very good news. So with all that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.